struggling caregiver gently cared for an elderly woman, not knowing her son was a CEO millionaire. And the story begins on a chilly morning in a small, quiet town. The sun had barely risen, and the streets were empty except for a young woman named Amira. She walked slowly, her worn shoes scraping against the pavement, her hands tucked deep into her thin sweater. Life had been hard on Amira. She had lost her parents young, had no siblings to lean on, and carried the heavy responsibility of surviving in a world that seemed to test her at every corner. Amira worked as a caregiver, not because it paid well, because it didn't, but because it was one of the few jobs she could find that aligned with her heart. She had always been a gentle soul, drawn to helping people. Yet, her own life was in chaos. She rented a small single room in an old building, often went to bed hungry, and sometimes questioned if she could continue this path. But each morning, she pushed herself to get up and go again, because she believed that kindness still mattered, even when life was unkind to her. One day, she was assigned to care for an elderly woman named Margaret. Margaret was in her late 70s, frail and often in pain. She lived alone in a large but lonely house on the edge of town. Most caregivers avoided her shifts because she was known for being difficult, snapping at people, refusing food, and closing herself off from any emotional connection. But Amira, despite her struggles, approached Margaret with patience. The first day, Margaret barely spoke. She kept her eyes fixed on the window as Amira carefully prepared her meals and helped her with her medication. When Amira softly asked questions, Margaret only responded with silence or short nods. For many, it would have been discouraging. But Amira reminded herself that people who push others away are often the ones who need love the most. So she stayed consistent. Day after day, Amira returned with a smile, even if her own life was falling apart. Sometimes she would hum softly while cooking, filling the quiet house with gentle warmth. Other times, she would bring Margaret small flowers she picked from the roadside, nothing fancy, just little reminders that someone thought of her. Slowly, something began to change. One evening, Margaret broke her silence. As Amira was helping her settle in bed, Margaret whispered, "You remind me of my daughter. She passed away years ago." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time, Amira saw the deep pain behind Margaret's bitterness. Instead of answering with words, Amira simply held Margaret's hand. From that moment, a bond began to grow between them. Weeks turned into months. Amira's kindness and patience melted Margaret's walls. The elderly woman started sharing stories from her youth. How she had once been a dancer, how she had loved her late husband, and how lonely she had been since her daughter's passing. Amira listened with genuine care, never rushing her, never judging. In return, Margaret began to look forward to her visits. Yet, Amira's personal struggles grew heavier. Her landlord threatened to evict her for late rent, and she often skipped meals so she could afford bus fare to Margaret's house. But she never let Margaret see her pain. She knew Margaret depended on her, and that gave her strength. One rainy afternoon, Margaret fell ill suddenly. Amira rushed her to the hospital, staying by her side all night. She wiped her forehead, held her hand through every painful moment, and never once thought about the fact that she was exhausted or hungry herself. To her, Margaret wasn't just a patient anymore, she was family. What Amira didn't know was that Margaret had a son. His name was Daniel, and he was a powerful CEO of a major company in the city. Daniel had been estranged from his mother for years, too caught up in building his empire, too consumed with wealth and success to check on her properly. But when the hospital called, he came rushing back. At first, Daniel didn't notice Amira. He was overwhelmed seeing his mother so weak, guilt weighing on him heavily. But then he watched the way Amira cared for her, with tenderness, patience, and love that went far beyond any job requirement. He saw the way Margaret smiled when Amira was around, a smile he hadn't seen in years. Over the next few days, Daniel quietly observed. He saw how Amira gently fed his mother, how she whispered words of encouragement, how she stayed late even when she wasn't paid for extra hours. One night, when Amira thought no one was looking, Daniel noticed her in the hospital hallway, counting coins in her hand, clearly worried about how she'd get home. That moment broke him. Finally, after Margaret recovered enough to return home, Daniel approached Amira. "Why do you do all this?" he asked. "You're not family. You're not paid enough. Why sacrifice so much?" Amira looked at him softly and replied, "Because everyone deserves to feel loved and cared for, especially when they're at their weakest. Money doesn't measure kindness, sir. Hearts do." Daniel was speechless. For years, he had chased money, thinking it was everything. But here was a young woman with nothing, yet she was richer in compassion than anyone he'd ever met. A week later, Daniel made a decision that would change Amira's life. He offered her not just a job at his company, but a role she could grow in, because he saw potential in her heart, leadership in her kindness, and strength in her struggles. At first, Amira hesitated, unsure if she belonged in such a world. But Daniel reassured her, telling her that sometimes, the right people aren't the ones with the most qualifications, but the ones with the purest intentions. Margaret, now smiling more than ever, encouraged her too. "You gave me back my life, Amira. Now it's time you live yours." With Daniel's support, Amira's life slowly transformed. She was able to secure a proper home, continue her education, and grow into a respected part of Daniel's company. But even with her newfound success, she never stopped being the same kind caregiver at heart. She continued to visit Margaret, sit by her side, and remind her that family isn't only about blood, it's about love. By the end, Amira's journey became more than just a story of survival. It was a lesson that the smallest acts of kindness can echo into the largest blessings, and that in a world chasing wealth, it is compassion that truly makes us rich. And as Daniel often said to others when telling their story, "I thought I had everything as a CEO, until I met Amira, who showed me the true meaning of wealth." Sparkle's message for viewers. Life is not measured by the riches we hold, but by the love we give and the lives we touch. Sometimes, even when we're struggling, choosing kindness can open doors we never imagined.